Hey everybody, in this video I'm going to provide a little walkthrough for our in-class problem for chapter 3, and this is going to show you how to complete the problem for chapter 3. And just like I did in the in-class problem for chapter 2, use this video and this template that I will have available for upload to accompany this problem to practice completion of a production cost report and make sure you're feeling good with that, because this definitely will be on the midterm. And like I said with the other video in regard to from chapter 2, what I would recommend is following along with me as I work through this. If you need the help, if you think you've got chapter 3 completely dialed in, then you can just move forward on chapter 4, etc. But if you need a little practice, so follow along with me and make sure you can kind of do it. We can do it together. You understand what I'm getting at there and how I'm solving, and then work it at least once by yourself without assistance on a blank copy and just the problem in front of you. Make sure that you can solve it from start to finish. And if need be, I would recommend doing that practice at least 2 or 3 times, just to make sure that you really feel comfortable solving these problems on your own. But to start, I will give you some instruction and guidance and kind of a walkthrough on how to complete. So without further ado, let's get in on that. So I've got a copy of the in-class problem snipped as a screenshot here, so we've got that available, and you all can see what the details are on this problem. So we're preparing this production cost report for July, and we're going to prepare the report, and then when we finish, we'll write the journal entry to transfer completed items from our department, assembly, to the next department, packaging. And some important information here, but let's assume that the materials are all added at the beginning of the production process. So they'll be 100% added as far as materials goes. And then we'll have some additional information about the percentage of completion for the direct labor and overhead, kind of as this note applies. These are some notes that were in the teacher version. So I will instruct you to also ignore this 60% completion. Don't worry about the percentage of completion at the beginning of the month. Just worry about it at the end of the month when we are completing this report. Okay, so we've got a little breakdown on beginning costs here. And again, just to highlight what chapter 3 is all about, we're doing process costing as opposed to job costing. That was in chapter 2. And the process costing is for producers that are making something that's very not customized, whereas job costing was for products that are very customized. So here we're producing basketballs in this problem. And so all the basketballs are going to look the same. These are not basketballs that are special ordered or have any customization. They're all the same product, essentially. And the one real maybe kind of tricky thing to wrap your mind around in this chapter is the idea of these equivalent units of production. But nothing to get too worked up about. It's just learn the process of the job cost report, and even if the equivalent units of production are still a little confusing in terms of the logic, just be sure that you can understand how to calculate it using this production cost report tool, and because that's the most important thing, essentially. So okay, let's get started. So we've got beginning production data, or we got production data in general showing beginning and ending balances and units into production. And then we've got beginning WIP, so work in process. It's got materials, labor, and overhead. And then we've got cost added during the month noted down here. So let's start filling this out. So we're going to start up here in the quantities section. So this is just going to be units. And then down here, we're going to have a breakdown of costs. So work in process beginning tells us that we have 500 units. That's here, WIP units at the beginning of the month, 7/1. This is the end of the month, July 31st. And then this tells us units started into production, 1,600. And then we just add these two together to get our total units that we're analyzing this month, 2,100. And then you could just kind of take this down to the bottom cell here. So total units here should equal total units here. So we're just accounting for whether those units are still in WIP at the end of the month or were they transferred out. And so we kind of can back into that information because it tells us here that there were 1,600 units started into production. And so basically we want to know, this needs to add up to Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. We need to add up how many units of production. That was started in production. Sorry. We want to, that's not right. Here, WIP units at the end of the month. So we know that 600 was still in WIP at the end of the month. So we can back into the transferred out just by taking the difference between the total minus what's in the ending, and that would be 1,500. Now, the units that are transferred out, so here in these columns, we're going to calculate our equivalent units. And so that's basically the unit broken down by cost. And we're talking about how completed from a percent perspective are these 600 units. And that's from a perspective of materials, labor, and overhead. So all of the units that were transferred out are 100% complete, right? Because we're working with different departments, so we can't transfer out a unit until it's 100% complete. So it's not work in process anymore. It's work finished, essentially. So it's 100% done. So we could say times 100% if you want to do it that way. You could just link to it. That'd be the same thing, etc. So we just want to say for these three categories of costs, these units are 100% complete. Now for these 600 units that are in WIP still, so they're still in work in process at the end of the month, they're in our department still. These are gone. These are on to the next department of packaging. We're still working on these ones. And we have to think about, out of these three categories, how complete are these 600 units? So in regard to materials, it tells us all materials are added at the beginning of the production process. So that's going to be 600. It's going to be 100% complete, basically, if we want to do the math. Again, basic math, just the same number. But now if we want to do the percentage of completion with labor and overhead, we have to look here and see that there are only 40, these 600 units are only 40%. They still have 60% left to do in regard to labor and overhead. So we're going to just take our 600 times 0.4, or we'll do 40%. And so the equivalent unit in regard to how complete these are is 240. So there's 240 equivalent units completed, which is the 600 times the 40%, because they're 40% complete. Okay, and then we're just going to put a formula in here to add these together. We're going to drag that formula across. So here's our total units to analyze, broken down by the specific costs here of materials, labor, and overhead. Okay, so these are all units. Now we're going to come down to the cost section here and analyze that part. Zoom out a little bit so you can see more of the information. I think we can see it all within one screen. I don't have to scroll. So let's see here. We've got beginning WIP figures that it tells us. So we can come to our cost data here, and it's going to tell us in regard to materials, we have $540 right here. In regard to labor, we have 300, and in regard to factory overhead, we have 200. And then we can just sum all those up. And I'm going to do one thing here. I'm going to put these in dollar currency format so that we can differentiate between dollars and units, because those are two different kind of concepts here, but related. Okay, and then we can look and see cost added during the month. It tells us that as well. So 2,400, 1,600, 1,380, and then we'll just drag our formula down to add these all together. So $5,380 were all added in, the sum of these, and then we had 1,040 in total, broken down by these categories. And then again, we're just going to do a real simple addition here of those two figures, and then we can just drag that across again. And now we've got our total costs to be accounted for. And then from above, we can bring down our equivalent units. So 2,100, and then 1,740 in labor, and 1,740 in overhead. And then finally, we're going to calculate a cost per unit. So we have total costs, and then we can divide that by our equivalent units then. And you just drag this across. So we're going to be total costs divided by equivalent units. Total cost divided by equivalent units. And we get the units here. And I'm going to copy the formatting here. So again, this is dollars. These are units. So just to differentiate between those two, we'll factor those out. And so based on all, what we're saying is essentially based on all of the units that have been transferred out and are still in work in process, the equivalent cost or the cost of producing each one of those units thus far as we're going is this in total. So we're going to use that to calculate both how much cost transferred out and how much cost is still sitting in finished goods. All right, so then we're going to take our unit cost times the number of units transferred out. So that's the 1,500 there. And then we're going to just, oh, can I do that here? Yeah, we're going to just drag that across. So we've got per unit cost times the units transferred out. Per unit cost times the units transferred out. I'm going to put these in dollar formatting again, just because that's the way we're doing this. And then I'm going to auto sum across just to get a total. So we've transferred out $5,100 of cost, as far as we're done with it, and it's going to packaging. It's finished goods to us. There's, it's going from our WIP to when it goes to packaging. Now it's going to be raw materials basically coming in at that cost to a packaging department, and the packaging is going to put their own direct labor and overhead onto the process as well. But that's a whole separate production sheet. We're just going to focus on assembly is our department. Okay, so that's all $5,100 transferred out. And then we're going to do the same thing. We're going to take our unit costs times the number of units, equivalent units still in ending inventory. So 840. Unit cost times number of units here in ending, 240. And unit cost times ending balance there. And then we're going to just pull these over just to get totals on everything. And finally, we're going to sum up all of the costs, both what's been transferred out and what's left still in work in progress. And you can see that gives us 6420, which agrees to the 6420 above that were all the costs that we had to account for. So we've completely assigned all the costs essentially to the different WIP, ending, and amount transferred out for this month. And so if we were to start over next month, we would now see above, if we were to reproduce this report again with, 7 or 8/1 is the starting, and 8, the end of August. Is that August 31st? I don't know. I can't remember if it's got 30. I think it's 31 days. So August 31st would be ending. But for our beginning balance, we would have 200 or how many units would we have? We would have number of WIP units here that would match up to what we have ending. So these units with various levels of completion. And those are, I guess it would be 40% complete basically at the beginning of next month, right? So it doesn't ask us to do this. So I'm just kind of thinking through this so maybe you all better understand how this all works. But we could reproduce this based on this for August, just using the ending figures that we have as the beginning figures. So we would have 600 units beginning. We wouldn't care about how much was complete, right? Because we'd be doing this sheet at the end of August. And so those beginning units in WIP that were here would then be worked on throughout the month. And our beginning WIP cost then would be what we have listed down here. So 840, 262 factory overhead would be basically in this position here, or listed out like this for what's in beginning WIP, because ending of one month becomes the beginning of the next, essentially. So this is all completed now. And then the last thing it asks us here, or a couple of things, it just says, or I think the only thing it says is, what would the journal entry be to transfer these completed products out from our department to the next department? Excuse me. And so just kind of not anything too crazy, but here's just a little general journal example. I'll make this real quick. So the journal entry to transfer this then would be our WIP account, our work in progress. And that looks funny, so let me do that. But it would be crediting from our WIP, our inventory account of 5,100, because we're done. It's finished goods kind of to us at this point, if you want to think of that. It was really still in WIP, but assembly. So we have multiple WIP, multiple work in progress accounts for different departments. And then it would, so it's leaving, it's an asset, so we're crediting, it's reducing off our out of our department, so it's no longer in our WIP, and now it's going to move over to work in process for, oh sorry, not the assembly, the packaging. The next department, who's going to track the cost and do a similar thing in their department, just like we did here, but we're just focusing on one department at a time, basically. Keep it more simple. So that would be the journal entry to account for what's happening here when we're talking about the cost moving from one part of the process to the next. And instead of it being job costing, like where we move from WIP to finished goods, this right away, this has multiple steps in the process. So it goes from one WIP to the next WIP. And once packaging is done with its process, then it'll move out of packaging. So we'll credit the packaging WIP, and it'll finally go into finished goods at that point as the whole production cycle is finished. So the main thing I want you to take away is really the practice of completing the production cost report. Again, you're going to have something similar to this on the exam, so getting comfortable with the overall process is really important here. So, all right, hopefully that's helpful. As I mentioned at the beginning, I think, following along with me first and making sure you're feeling okay with that, and then trying to complete this yourself once, twice, 3 times until you feel really confident with it is going to be the ultimate preparation for solving problems like this, to really help you lock in this data. So that's, this process and the information in chapter 3. So that's what I recommend. And so that way you'll feel confident and you'll do well on the exam, and you'll be able to really feel confident that you've learned this process out of chapter 3. All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you in the next video.